Subscribe to LearnCab and hit the bell icon to get notified.
Welcome back, my dear learner. Now let's start off with a very fresh topic, which would give you an overall idea on the entire country's position and strategies towards import and export. It is nothing but foreign trade policy. So in this particular section, I will be talking about foreign trade policy 2015-20, that is a 5-year policy, and how that policy is going to influence the entire import and export mechanism. So the discussion of customs is complete only when the entire FTP, which is foreign trade policy, has been discussed. Though customs would act as a law which governs import and export, there are a lot of understanding that has to be given on economic policies which would affect import and export. As a country, the government will have its own regulations on how it wanted to regulate or to promote its import and export. So, as per the law, there has been power given to the government to enact. So, as per the law, there has been power that is given to the government to frame policies relating to import and export. So, the first thing that we need to understand is the background in which FTP has come in India. Also, we will be discussing on the later part of it various measures that the government has adopted to make sure that our balance of trade creates some strengthening positions. Now let's look at the basic framework, then we will go ahead with each of the schemes that is available and made available by the government in this foreign trade policy that I'm going to discuss. So let's look at what is foreign trade policy. Foreign trade policy is a set of guidelines or instructions issued by central government in matter relating to import and export of goods in India. That is foreign trade. In India, the Ministry of Commerce and Industry governs affairs relating to promotion and regulation of foreign trade. So it is Ministry of Commerce and Industry which governs the import and export, including the promotion and regulation of import and export. Like I told you, from where the right of the government to frame these policies comes in, it comes from the main legislation that we have. So foreign trade policy is not a legislation as such. It comes from another legislation which gives the government power to come up with a policy. So what is that legislation which gives the power to the government? It is Foreign Trade Development and Regulation Act 1992. So this Foreign Trade Development and Regulation Act 1992 has two sections which I wanted to discuss with you. One is section 3 and another one is section 5. So section 3 says that the government can come up with policies for import and export. Now section 5 says that, this Director General of Foreign Trade can help the government to come up with these policies. So Foreign Trade Development and Regulation Act provides the development and regulation of foreign trade by facilitating import into and augmenting export from India and for the matters connected therewith or incidental thereto. So this is the act which is in the background which gave the power for the government to frame an FTP. Now let's look at what are the powers that is given to the government as per this Foreign Trade Development and Regulation Act 1992. So I wanted to discuss mainly with 4 different powers that has been given. First one, the government may make provisions for facilitating and controlling foreign trade. See, all these words are very important when it comes to foreign trade and its discussion. So they are using the word facilitating and controlling foreign trade. So there are cases where the government will facilitate and make it easy for people to do foreign trade. Whenever I use the word foreign trade, it means both import as well as export. So when it comes to facilitating and controlling, they are saying. So what is the meaning of these two words being coined together? It is to give you an understanding that there are cases where the government will facilitate, make it easy for you, will augment you, will support you, will give you rewards and incentive, and there are cases where government will control you from doing an import or an export. So this particular act gives powers to the government to make provisions for all this. Second one, to give you further understanding on what is the meaning of facilitating and controlling, it says government may prohibit, would say no to something, or restrict, would say that, see, I will prohibit means you cannot do certain things, restrict means you can do provided I give you some permission. So ask me before you do. Okay, then regulate. Okay, they're saying that, okay, you can do it, but I am putting so and so conditions while you're doing it. So it's like, the father asking you to do certain things. He would have already said, no, you can't do so and so things. He would have also said, see, these things if you're doing, like say, if you want to stay back late, you will have to ask me the permission in the morning. Or he would have told you that, okay, so you can do so and so thing, you can go out with your friends, provided you come back before 10. So something like this would have been given. So all these are the method in which it is facilitated and controlled. So the government may prohibit, restrict and regulate export and import in all or specified cases, as well as subject to certain exemptions. Then government is authorized to formulate and announce an export and import policy. Earlier it was called as EXIM policy, and that has been replaced with foreign trade policy. Also amend the same from time to time by notification in official gazette. So government can formulate and announce an EXIM policy, export and import policy, or a foreign trade policy per se, you can take it like that. Then government is also authorized to appoint Director General of Foreign Trade for the purpose of the act, including formulation and implementation of the policy. So that's what I told you. Section 5 says Director General of Foreign Trade, DGFT office, can help the government to create this particular policy. So the authority which would actually deal with customs is this Director General of Foreign Trade. So FTP is formulated from his office. Now let's look at what is this foreign trade policy is all about. So in exercise of the power conferred to government by this Foreign Trade Development and Regulation Act, Union Ministry of Commerce and Industry, which is dealing with foreign trade, generally announces an integrated foreign trade policy, which covers both import as well as export every 5 years with certain underlined objective. This is what I wanted to stress you on. So once a foreign trade policy is announced, it is available for 5 years. That is why in the beginning when I was talking about foreign trade policy, I told you that I'm going to discuss about foreign trade policy from 2015 to 2020, which means 5 years you have one single policy which governs import and export. Then you might have a question. See, there are a lot of things that might change, but when the government is making a plan to achieve something, say government wanted to create their fiscal deficit to a certain point, government wanted to make sure that their balance of trade are reaching at a certain point. If at all government wants to plan, do you think all these plans will be available or these plans will be achievable in a period of an year? Plus, when the government announces a new policy, for the people to get benefit of it and start doing something, it would take a normal span of time. So the government has decided it will have a policy for every 5 years on a stretch. So the current policy that is running is formulated by 2015. It is effective till 2020. Now every year Things can change around. There will be a lot of changes. Can they amend it? Yes, that's what we have read in the powers that is given to the government. Government can amend it from time to time. So generally what they do is that before April they do the amendment and change what and all to be changed in their foreign trade policy. Also, from time to time they come up with notifications and circulars to give you guidance as well as some procedural amendment on these schemes that are announced by the government, because government is well aware that on a yearly basis there should be revision of this particular policy to make sure that it is up to the current economic scenario in the country. Then the foreign trade policy was earlier called as EXIM policy, import and export import policy. So EXIM policy is now being called as foreign trade policy. This policy is updated every year in addition to the changes that are made throughout the year. This is what we just discussed. Now let's look at what are the objective of foreign trade policy. See, every year government is coming up with these revisions, or in 5 years they are coming out with a new policy with certain given objective. So what are these objective of foreign trade policy? Now you think in common sense, what is that the government wants to do generally? There are two kind of things that they wanted to do. See, when every foreign trade policy should talk about both import as well as export. You think of it, normally import of a country is going to get benefited to the country, or it is going to have an implication on its domestic industry. It is definitely going to have an implication on its domestic industry. But a country like India, can we stop the import? No, we are not self-sufficient. There are mandatory imports that has to happen. So it has to regulate and make sure that all these imports are happening with proper understanding, proper analysis. Reason, there could be countries in which India has good relationship. So if at all India gives a wrong impression to those countries, our export to that country can be affected because we are regulating our imports. So there are multiple foreign trade agreements that the government of India would have made with multiple neighboring countries, or the countries in which government of India has good relationship with. So it has to give you easy facilitation for import, as well as it has to augment and make sure that there should be more than sufficient export that is happening from the country, because balance of trade being positive will give an economic boost to the entire nation. So every foreign trade policy would be looking at all these points. So the first one is to develop export potential. So the objective of foreign trade policy is to promote export and develop its potential. So make facilities in here in India so that the export can be happening a lot. Improving export performances. So when there is international trade, there is definitely competition. So our foreign trade policy should augment our competitiveness in international trade and in foreign markets. So the Indian products are the ones people should be looking at. Then encouraging foreign trade, creating favorable balance of payment position. Import export position should be in our favor. There should be more export. That is the objective in which we are working on. Not necessary that a country like India can achieve it overnight. It would take time. That's why we are going for a 5-year policy. Then the policies are driven by factors like export-led growth. So the objective remains on the same line. Export has to be promoted. There should be more and more export that's happening. Improving its efficiency is a very key point, because there will be cases wherein the export from India are not mostly preferred because of a lot of inefficiencies in India. So in such cases, there should be a lot of incentives that is given to the exporter to still make them successful in their international market. There should be support that is given to make sure that the quality is maintained. All these things are to be considered in our foreign trade policy to give a holistic growth to our entire foreign trade. Competitiveness of Indian industries, ease of doing business, etc. So these are the factors that is driving our foreign trade policy. Now let's look at what are the silent features of this foreign trade policy. Export or import of goods and service is generally free unless specifically regulated by the provisions of the policy or any other law for the time being in force. Very important area. Since we have already learned customs, we have already gone through the entire provisions. So you would have understood that as far as import and export is concerned in India, it is generally free unless otherwise the law provides for some kind of a restriction or prohibition. So import and exports are generally allowed free. That is the main feature of our foreign trade policy. We don't say it is only upon some authorization or license you can do import and export. No, it is generally free. It can be done unless the law provides for otherwise. Next, export and import of goods are broadly categorized as three. Very important. So there are three categories of import and export of goods I can call. One is free, which means I can do any number of imports and exports, there is no problem with it. Second one, it is restricted. I'll have to obtain certain approvals before I do these import and exports. So I need to get some kind of an authorization from the government side. Third one is prohibited, which means I cannot do any import and export of these goods. So it is free, regulated and prohibited. So our law is given in the same objective and feature that they have given those things which can be done free, those things which are restricted and those things which are prohibited. We have separate laws dealing with it. Now in some cases there is something called as state trading enterprises, which is managed by governments itself. So there are certain goods which are freely tradable in international market, which means I can do import and export. It is in free category, but it is not free for everyone. There are certain import and export that is given exclusively only for state trading enterprises. We will learn about the state trading enterprises in detail in other FTP areas, but you understand there are government agencies and government organizations called as state trading enterprises, which are having free export and import option of certain goods, and it can be, there are certain goods it can be done only through them. There are cases like where I can actually take a permission and do otherwise as well, but it is generally given allocated exclusively for state trading enterprises. So your first point of understanding in this area is that there's an entity called as state trade enterprises which might get some privilege over certain goods import and export. Next is, there are restrictions on import and exports of various strategic, health, defense, environment and other reasons. So there are multiple reasons in which import and exports are restricted. If goods are restricted for import and export but not prohibited, the government can give permission or license for specific reasons. Like I said, restriction is different from prohibition. Restriction requires approval, prohibition it cannot be done. Then exports are promoted through various promotional schemes. There are multiple export promotional schemes given in foreign trade policies, like export remission schemes, export concession schemes, there are advance authorization schemes, there are schemes on capital goods, there are schemes which gives incentive. There are multiple type of schemes because the objective itself says that there should be export promotion. Now I am going to give you a sentence that is taken from foreign trade policy, which says goods and services are to be exported and not taxes. So what does that mean? It means that goods and services can only be exported, not taxes. Which means what? You cannot export taxes, which means when you are exporting goods or services, you cannot have taxes levied on that particular export of goods and services. Again, note carefully, this applies only for export. So in international trade, the understanding is that a country can only export goods and services, which means the exports are not taxed. So this is more of a common understanding that is followed across the world. So say for example, let's take a practical case and understand. India is exporting goods to Australia. The question is that if India is levying export duty, the person who is importing goods in Australia will have to buy the goods with an export duty loaded on it, which means I'm even collecting taxes from that other person. So they say no, you cannot do, goods and services can only be exported, not taxes. This is the general understanding. So taxes on exports are either exempted, again exports are either exempted or adjusted or refunded on both output and inputs through schemes of duty exemption, duty refund, drawback, rebate. We have already seen in customs the cases, even you would have seen it in case of GST, where you get a refund of inputs when there is export that is happening. There are multiple provisions. We'll have a recap of it in export promotional schemes. But for the understanding, this is commonly understood that exports are generally not taxed, rather imports are taxed. That is another feature of FTP. Then capital goods can be imported at nil duty. So there is export promotion of capital goods schemes wherein if I have to import a capital good, which means a machinery, let's take an understanding machinery, and I'm using this machinery to manufacture goods which I will eventually export. So this import of capital goods are actually augmenting my export of goods. So the government is ready to allow you to import this capital goods or the machinery at nil duty for the purpose of export under the scheme of EPCG. So we will learn EPCG in full. At that time we can have further discussion. Then for the units undertaking to export all their production, there are special schemes that they can avoid taxes at every stage under the scheme of EOU SEZ. Understand, SEZ is not dealt in FTP. There's a separate act for that. But you have to understand that if there are entities which are going to export entire production that is done by them, then they can opt for schemes like export oriented units or special economic zones, which will make them enjoy tax-free facilities in multiple cases. So all these are the features of FTPs. Then in certain cases, import gets full duty exemption or concession in some special purposes. Like I said, if there is an import which is actually helping to make an eventual export, then there is no harm in giving an duty exemption on that particular import. That's where we have seen in customs about drawback schemes. Now we'll be learning about advance authorization for duty free imports and all that. So that is another feature of FTP. Duty credit scrips. Scrips are nothing but an incentive in the form of taxes which are given as a financial instrument. You think of it, I'm giving you a financial instrument which can be used. I'm giving you coupons. You think of scrips as coupons. So I'm giving you duty credit scrips, which means I'm giving you, you make certain export, I'll give you certain scrips, some incentives, some rewards, which is in the form of coupons. Think of it, you go to a mall, you make purchases of 10,000. Then the mall might give you some vouchers, right? Coupons. Now consider this mall as government. Government wants to promote exports. Like the mall wants to increase their sale. So what incentive they can give? The mall might tell you that if you go ahead and then have purchases for 10,000, I'm ready to give you a voucher of 2,500, which you cannot convert into cash directly, rather you can use it for further purchase. So likewise, government is saying that you make more export, I have some coupon for you. I'm calling that as scrips, duty credit scrips. So this coupon can be used for making tax payments. So eventually there are scripts which are transferable. So you can give it to someone who wants to make payment and they will give you some money for that. So it's eventually they are giving you incentive for promoting exports. So duty credit script schemes are designed to promote exports for some specified goods to specified markets and to promote export of specified services. So you have schemes like MEIS and SCIS and all that, so where you have goods export schemes and service export schemes. So all these schemes will give you this kind of incentive. That is also another policy that is available inside foreign trade policies. Now let's look at what is the foreign trade policy that we are trying to discuss. Like I initially started off with, we are discussing foreign trade policy 2015-2020. The present foreign trade policy, which was announced on 1/4/2015, which means 2020, I'll have a fresh foreign trade policy coming up again for 5 more years. So this integrated policy of 15-20 is applicable for a period from 1/4/2015 till 31/3/2020. With every year there is an option for revision. Now, I've told you this earlier also. Now again I stress, special economic zones are covered under a separate act, Special Economic Zones Act 2015. Are they not part of foreign trade policy? We had discussed what are the silent features. Now let's look at what is the guiding principle of foreign trade policy 2015-20. We've been discussing about what will be available in foreign trade policy generally, which would have been already there in 2015-20 policy as well. Now let's look at foreign trade policy 15-20 in detail and see what is the guiding principle which governs those schemes which are given in this FTP 15-20. First one, generation of employment, increasing value addition in the country and keeping in mind Make in India vision. So they wanted to make sure that they promote a lot of employment, they make sure that there is value addition in the country, they make sure that there are a lot of manufacturing sectors promotional schemes, so that the Make in India vision is becoming real. Second one, there should be ease of doing business. So in this particular century, how can there be ease of doing business and trade facilitation? How can I make compliances easy in this particular world? What is that one should be using for making it very easy? Obviously, it is technology. So this entire foreign trade policy that was drafted 15-20 revolves around a lot of electronic data interchange, use of technology, and making compliances easy for the exporter and importer. So that is a very major change that has happened from the earlier foreign trade policy. So most of their procedures are paperless, and it goes through that. It has to be like that, because only you can augment the businesses with ease of compliances. Then they wanted to have steps to encourage manufacture and export by SEZ, EOU, STP, your software technology park, hardware technology park, biotechnology park, all this. Then encouraging e-commerce exports. So this is another method of exports that will happen through e-commerce, and mainly it happens through couriers and all that. So they wanted to make sure that they promote e-commerce exports for specified product. So that you can find some policies like that inside the FTP 15-20, because this is the major objective. Special efforts to resolve quality compliance and trade disputes. If you really see, there are single window mechanism in which an exporter can get multiple approvals like quality control and all that through one single portal. So that actually reduces the time in which he can do an export. It increases the quality of export. There are multiple things that will come across. All these are possible, facilitated through technology. Then Duty credit scripts, we have already discussed about scripts. So duty credit scripts to encourage exports of specified product to specified market, even for export of services. So you have mercantise export India schemes, you have service export India schemes. So all these schemes have come keeping in their mind that they wanted to make sure that there is encouragement for specified exports and there is encouragement for export of services. So to make sure that these guiding principles that we have already discussed, like creation of employment and making through the Make in India vision, ease of doing business, trade facilitation, encouraging all these export oriented units, encouraging e-commerce based exports, and making sure there is quality, making sure there is less trade disputes, and giving scripts for those people who are making exports with specific conditions to specific countries. All these are done through multiple measures taken by the government, which we will have to look at. So the first one is making things easy, ease of doing business, trade facilitation. So they said number of mandatory documents required for export and imports are reduced to just 3 each. So 3 mandatory documents. Let's look at what are the documents. Say if it's export of goods from India, import also will not have much changes. 3 documents. Say it could be bill of lading, airway bill, lorry receipt, railway receipt, or postal receipt, depending upon what is the mode that you're using. This is a transferable document. We have already seen these procedures in customs. If you recall, bill of lading is a transferable document which gives you the claim towards that particular goods, and this is issued by the carrier. So bill of lading, if it's by sea, airway bill, if it's by air, lorry receipt, railway receipt, postal receipts, all this has to be one mandatory document together with either invoice or a packing list. So commercial invoice, packing list, then your shipping bill or bill of export for filing your or paying duty to the government. So these 3 documents, claim towards, if you are doing export, then your claim towards that particular goods, bill of lading, invoice, shipping bill, or bill of exports if it's land. Then if it's import, the same thing, you require to have a document which says about the ownership. Then you require to have a commercial invoice or packing list. Instead of shipping bill, you will have bill of entry in case of imports. So these are the 3 documents that is required as mandatory from your side. So multiple documents has been given away with. Very simple procedure for import and export is the objective of foreign trade policy this time. Then to extend the facility 24/7 in custom clearance. So there is no need to, and there are multiple places where there is no merchant overtime charges, which means if at all I have to ask someone, see 24/7 means it is not government office hours. So if I can do a midnight clearance from the port, be it a seaport or an airport, if I can do, the officers will be functioning. So the government used to charge a merchant overtime charges. There are ports which government said no, I'm not going to charge it, I will be okay with it, and I'm going to provide you 24/7 clearance. It's a huge boost to the entire import and export. So the facility of 24/7 custom clearance for specified imports have been made available at 18 specified seaports, 17 specified cargo complexes. Single window scheme, which I said, instead of going and filing multiple applications and multiple portals, there is single window schemes has been introduced to enable importer and exporter to lodge their clearance document at a single point, thereby requiring common platform to trade to meet requirements of all regulatory agencies, including your quality, including your approvals. Everything can be done through just one upload. The government will do an EDI, electronic data interchange, and share the data to further authorities within them. So you don't need to. So for the importer and the exporter, it has been made very, very easy. So these are all the measures that is taken by the government. Then, so further, the government has taken measures to facilitate processing of shipping bills before actual shipment. And so I can actually submit the shipping bill online prior to the actual shipment that I'm going to do. In case of air shipment, for 7 days prior I can do. In case of sea, 14 days. So these are the measures that has been taken to make sure that the exports are happening smoother. Now DGFT under electronic data interchange that we have discussed, initiative has provided a facility of online filing of application to obtain an import export code and various authorizations and scripts. So all these submissions are now online, plus they have introduced a PAN based IE code, import export code, to facilitate import and exports. And except certain cases it is not required. All other cases you require an import and export code. Say service cases, unless you want an incentive, you don't need to have an IE code. So PAN is a prerequisite because now they are treating PAN as an IE code. Now let's look at administration of FTP. So FTP is formulated, controlled and supervised by Director General of Foreign Trade. So he is in charge of it, and he is attached to the office of Ministry of Commerce and Industry, Government of India. And DGFT is the one which gives you authorization. What do you mean by authorization? It's nothing but a license for import and export. But what is that we have read earlier? Import and exports are free unless regulated. So there are cases where it is regulated. I might have to obtain an authorization. So authorization means a permission in terms of Foreign Trade Development and Regulation Act to import and export. It also grants importer exporter code. So IE code has been obtained from DGFT website, and an import and export without IE code is not permitted unless specifically exempted, like I said. Now decisions of DGFT is final and binding in respect of interpretation of any provisions of foreign trade policy, because that has been framed by their office, and classification of any items in Indian Trade Classification of Harmonized System, ITCHS, which we will discuss. We've been already discussing that in customs about classification. So DGFT would be the final authority for that. The content, scope or issues of any authorization issued under FTP, all this will be having the final say on DGFT. So his decision is final, we cannot challenge it further. Other authorities involved, you have Central Board of Indirect Tax and Customs. So CBIC comes again under Ministry of Finance, and it has two departments, one is for customs, another one is for GST. So on the customs part you do have DGFT and then all the customs related provisions, and for GST you do have state and center. Now both of them are having administrational powers. They have given certain taxable person to center, certain taxable person to state, which you would learn in detail in GST. Now Reserve Bank of India comes in for monitoring and formulating policy for management of currencies, like conversion and all, making all the payments, because there are multiple cases. To ensure that import and exports are true, there should be some kind of a check on whether foreign currency is actually coming to India. See, when we say export, I'm promoting, what's the reason for promotion? It's all about having more foreign currency in India so that our balance of trade can be improved, our foreign our rupee gets strengthened, and all that we theoretically learn. But practically, what if it's not coming? So there are multiple certificates that has to be issued, there are multiple policies that has to be framed by Reserve Bank of India. So they also comes as an authority under customs. Like I said, in some cases in GST, state GST departments can also come under some taxable person's jurisdiction. So let's look at contents of foreign trade policy. So like I said, foreign trade policy is FTP 1520, and it is having 9 chapters. giving basic policy, and like I said, it was notified in official gazette by central government on 1/4/2015. It is amended every year, and thereafter there are a lot of amendments through notification. So normally it's amended by April every year and during the year as well. So when you're reading foreign trade policy, you have something that has to be read together with it. So there are basically 4 more documents that you'll have to look at together with it. One is Handbook of Procedure, which deals with what are the procedures that is there in this particular schemes that are announced under foreign trade policy. So if you look at it, there are 9 chapters in foreign trade policy which are supported in with 9 chapters in Handbook of Procedures. And you do have appendices which are going to give you the forms, and there is Ayat Niryat forms which is also available, which gives you the forms for all these particular schemes and how they can be filled and how the filing of form should be like and what is the content and all that will be given. So I'll have to read it together with these two to get an overall idea about the schemes. Apart from that, I do have SIO in Standard Input Output Norms, which is very important that there are certain schemes, let's say advance authorization is a scheme. Then you have duty free import authorization scheme. So these kind of schemes, they are eligible only if there is a standard input output ratio that is being maintained. So there are certain notified goods which the government has come up with an SION guidelines which is required for them to avail these kind of benefits of advance authorization or duty free imports and all that. So we'll have to look at these SION, the norms of standard input and output, also together with the FTP and the Handbook of Procedures and Forms. Then you have so you do have Indian Trade Codes harmonized system, which is very close to what we have as a harmonized system codes in international customs. But in India we have an additional 2 more digits added to it, wherein in foreign you have 6. So we have 8 digit up to that which we have classified the goods. So it has basically 2 schedules. One is for import, another one is for export. So the import, like we have already seen it in customs tariff act, schedule 1, schedule 2, same thing. So you have schedule 1 describes rules and guidelines relating to import policies, and schedule 2 describes rules and regulations relating to export policies. Most of the goods can be imported without any authorization. Schedule 2 contains very few products where export is prohibited or restricted. Excluding those items, import of all other goods is free. So the classification of goods are given by Indian Trade Codes of Harmonized System, which is very close to what we have earlier, and it uses these chapters to classify the goods and tell them whether they're free or restricted or prohibited and all that. So chapter 1 talks about legal framework and trade facilitation, which talks about general ideas of it. Then chapter 2 talks about general understanding on import and export. Chapter 3 talks about export promotional schemes, export from India schemes. 4 talks about remission schemes, exemption schemes and duty drawback, advance authorization, DEI, DFIA and duty drawback and all comes under this. Chapter 3 talks about mercantile export India schemes, service export India schemes. Then chapter 5 talks about EPCG, which is export promotion capital goods scheme. Then 6 talks about specific entities like EOU, electronic hardware technology park, software technology park and biotechnology parks, all these schemes. Then 7 talks about deemed exports, 8 talks about quality compliance in trade disputes, 9 talks about the general definition that we have. So this is the entire structure of foreign trade policy, which you don't have it in that detail in your syllabus, but we need to understand what are the major schemes and what are the major provisions which can even be tested in the examinations. So that will be the more or less the ideology in which we are going to approach foreign trade policy. So the weightage and the content, we will have to look at what are the areas which can be asked. So I don't need to go look at the forms and their list of things and all that. Rather, I should look at what are the questions coming in, and there's a specific pattern in which questions are coming in. So we will have to understand that and then learn it accordingly. So this would be the introduction on foreign trade policy. So I'll see you with the next session on the general import and export procedures and understanding in foreign trade policy. Thank you.
Subscribe to LearnCab and hit the bell icon to get notified.